Have you ever wondered how an AI can just look at a picture and, boom, tell you if it's a cat, a dog, or a zebra? It all happens inside something called a convolutional neural network, or CNN. Now, we know these networks are amazing at finding features. Things like whiskers, stripes, or pointy ears. But how do they take all that info and make one final confident call? So, imagine the CNN has done all the hard work. It's scanned the picture, broken it all down, and created this thing called a feature map. It's basically a big collection of all the important patterns it found. But this feature map is really just a grid of numbers. How in the world does the machine get from that grid to a simple word like zebra? Well, that's the big question we're diving into today. The answer to this puzzle, it turns out, isn't in some other super complex feature-finding layer. Nope. It's in the final piece of the network, the part that pretty much acts like the brain for the entire operation. This is the decision maker. And that decision maker is what we call the fully connected layer. This is the last step, and you could argue it's one of the most important steps in the whole process. It's where all those abstract features finally come together to make sense of the big picture. Okay, so what exactly is a fully connected layer? Let's break down what makes this thing the network's brain and why it's just so perfect for this final critical job. At its heart, a fully connected layer is really just a classic old-school type of neural network. It hangs out at the very end of the CNN, and its entire job is to take all those high-level features the other layers found and use them to make the final call. And they are not kidding with the name fully connected. I mean, it's literal. As you can see here, it's this incredibly dense web where every single neuron in one layer is talking to every single neuron in the next. It's maximum communication. Everyone is connected to everyone else. So why this super dense structure? Well, because these layers are absolutely incredible at learning the really complex nonlinear relationships between all those different features. This is the part of the network that finally figures out that, hey, pointy ears plus whiskers plus furry texture, that probably means cat. All right, so let's walk through the actual process. How do we get from that big grid of features to a final, concrete answer? It's really just a two-step process. First up, the network takes that two-dimensional feature map and flattens it. Just imagine taking that grid of numbers and lining them all up, one after the other, into one single long column. This creates a vector, a list of numbers, that the fully connected layer can actually read and work with. Next, that long vector gets fed right into the fully connected layers. As all that data passes through that dense web of connections, the network starts to learn which features are the most important for figuring out a specific class. It starts assigning weights to different features, kind of like it's voting on what the image actually is. And this is important. The output isn't just one word. It's a list of probabilities. So the network might say something like, okay, I'm 70% sure this is a zebra, 20% sure it's a horse, and maybe 10% sure it's a dog. The highest probability wins, and that's the final label it gives. But with this much power comes a pretty big challenge. These dense, fully connected layers are so good at learning that sometimes, well, they can learn too well. And that leads to a classic problem in machine learning. What happens when a model stops being an expert on the general idea of a zebra and instead becomes an expert on the specific zebras it saw while it was training? This is a huge problem called overfitting. Overfitting is kind of like a student who just memorizes the answers to a practice test instead of actually learning the concepts. I mean, they'll ace that specific test, for sure, but the second they see a new question on the final exam, they're completely lost. The model gets brittle and just falls apart when it sees data it hasn't seen before. So how do we stop our AI from just memorizing the answers? Well, the solution is brilliant, a little bit weird, and unbelievably effective. It's a technique called dropout. Yep, you heard that right. To make the network smarter, we randomly turn parts of it off while it's training. We literally drop out certain neurons, which forces the network to figure out how to work around the missing pieces. So here's how it works. For every single training step, each neuron has a chance of being temporarily ignored. This is so important because it stops the neurons from becoming too dependent on each other. That's a problem called coadaptation, where a small group of neurons ends up doing all the heavy lifting. Dropout forces every single neuron to pull its own weight and learn features that are useful on their own, making the whole network way more robust and flexible. I know, it sounds totally backward, right? Making a network smarter by randomly ignoring parts of it? But the proof, like always, is in the data. Does this strange trick actually lead to better results? Well, the hard numbers tell the whole story. A standard neural network had an error rate of 1.60%, but just look what happens when you bring in dropout. As the table shows, the error rate drops a lot, down to 1.35%, then 1.25%, and with a few more tweaks, it gets all the way below 1%. The results are just crystal clear. So the key takeaway here is this. No matter the dataset or the network design, the research came to the same conclusion again and again. Models trained with Dropout just consistently performed better. They were actually learning, not just memorizing. And that leaves us with a really fascinating thought, doesn't it? This incredibly advanced artificial intelligence learns best by introducing a little bit of randomness, by forcing itself not to rely on any single part. It literally gets smarter by temporarily getting dumber. What does that tell us, not just about machines, but maybe about the very nature of learning itself?